General, good evening.
I'm sorry, Sajeev ji, I've put everybody on the mute. So
कोई गल नहीं.
yeah.
कोई गल नहीं.
Yeah, thank you. And I request you also to mute yourself.
Should I mute myself?
Yeah, I've done it.
Connected to Shaylee Sefi's iPhone XS and Shaylee Sefi's iPhone 7.
Right. So now all set and done, sir?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. So, Preeti ji, shall I unmute Shweta also? Preeti ji? You can't hear me, Preeti ji?
No, it's fine. I can.
Yeah,
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay, all right.
When you
yeah, it's all set and done from my side. It's on the recording mode and of course live on the Facebook streaming now. And it's already 6. Yeah.
Thank you. Last week, 153 writers, artists, and academics, including J.K. Rowling and Noam Chomsky, signed an open letter warning of a threat to intellectual life in the United States. The free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted, the letter reads, as it condemns a new set of moral attitudes and political commitments that tend to weaken our norms of open debate and tolerance of differences in favor of ideological conformity. Is it true then that the ideal of open debate is under siege? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this online session that we are having today. And the evening's discussion is around General H.S. Panag's new book, The Indian Army, Reminiscences, Reform, and Romance, an incisive, candid look at that most powerful of institutions, the Indian Army. Divided into 6 sections on human rights, reforms, leadership, conflict, etc., General Panag examines burning questions surrounding the armed forces. A look at the chapters is enough to tell you that he is writing honestly, bravely, and from a sense of writing what he perceives are inherent weaknesses in the system. He has discussed issues of internal security as well as conflicts with India's neighbors and the Kashmir policy, including post-Article 370. Let me say that I'm indeed delighted and also touched that we are doing this discussion at Majha House, even if it is not in the house, but we are doing it online. Majha House, set up in 2018 in March, is also known as Billu's House. A name that's been attached to this house in Amritsar for the last 43 years. Billu, Second Lieutenant SS Gill of the Deccan Horse, was my brother-in-law. He died at 22 in the 1971 war with Pakistan. I never met him, but his spirit imbues the house. He still lives there, though he never saw the house. Majha House is a platform for literature and culture, but it's also a special way of memorializing a young man full of potential who gave his life for his country and who has been missed every single day by his family, who never forgot him. It is for all these reasons that this is a very important session for all of us at Majha House. General Panag, PVSM, AVSM, was also a veteran of the 1971 war, GOC in command of Northern and Central Commands. He has held prestigious positions and served extensively in operational and counter-insurgency areas. He's credited for having initiated major reforms in the army, and he has served as a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal. He's also a well-known and respected defense analyst. In conversation with General Panag today, we have Squadron Leader Rana T.S. Chhina, writer, military historian, currently Secretary and Editor of USI Center for Armed Forces, Historical Research. He is Vice President of the Indian Military Historical Society, UK. He saw active service on the Siachen Glacier and with IPKF in Sri Lanka as well, and also counter-insurgency operations in the Northeast. He was appointed as honorary member of the Order of the British Empire in 2016, and also given Belgium's highest honor, the Order of Leopold, for contributing to Indo-Belgian ties through his work on the history of the Indian Army in Flanders in World War I. Since we are also trying to keep this as an online launch of the book, I'd like everybody now, our speakers, to please hold the book up so that we can show everybody. General Panag, would you also hold up the book?
Yes.
Thank you. The book is available on Amazon and also probably at a bookshop near you if the retail is open and if you don't have lockdown in your city. And definitely you can order it online. And I think there's an ebook version available as well. Rana, I'd like to hand it over to you now, please, so that you can take the conversation forward. Thank you.
May I request Preeti ji, please make an announcement. I could see people with their mics on. I'm trying to mute them. Please make an announcement so that it doesn't disturb the session.
Audience, will you please mute yourselves because otherwise there's disturbance and we cannot hear our panelists. Thank you.
Can I start, Preeti?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good
Still
evening.
there's a noise.
Okay. Sorry. Anyhow, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's evening's discussion, which promises to be a very interesting one. I must confess, when Preeti asked me to review the book and conduct the discussion, I wasn't really quite sure what to expect. Usually books by senior retired officers tend to follow a pattern, and they usually tend to be high on volume and low on substance. So I was actually quite pleasantly surprised when I received this book. And at the outset, I must compliment the author. Sir, you've raised a very large number of very pertinent questions. And we could actually spend a very, very long time talking about them, debating about them. But one thing is for sure, that these are issues that need to be discussed. So I think you've done a great service, both to the armed forces, to the Indian Army, as well as to the country by, I think, bringing these out into the forefront. particularly today, when increasingly, there is a tendency to view any kind of suggestion for reform or examination of certain issues that might be perceived as causing embarrassment. There's a increasing tendency to shy away from them. So to that extent, this is a very, very timely piece of writing. For all of you who are listening, the book is not, it's not a narrative account. It's not a history of the Indian Army, which is actually, to be honest, something that I thought it might be. I thought it'd be one of two things. One is either it would be a history of the Indian Army or it would be a pure biography. It is neither. Although there are elements of, there are biographical accounts. The general was literally born into the army. His father served in the army. As the book is dedicated to him. And and then having been born into an army family, having grown up in an army cantonment, in an army environment, he then went on to serve for another 40 years with some exceptional infantry units. He was first commissioned into 4 Sikh, which, as many of you may know, was the legendary 36th Sikh, Chatti Sikh, which is the Saragadi battalion. And in case those of you can't make the correlation, you may have seen that movie by the gentleman Akshay Kumar, which was made recently on this battle, where 21 soldiers held off a Pathan Lashkar of over several thousands, and they fought to the last man and the last bullet. And then from 4 Sikh, he subsequently went on to the 5th Gurkhas, another phenomenal unit with a fantastic fighting record. They won 2 VCs before breakfast in the Burma campaign on one particular day. And then he even subsequently graduated onto the mechanized infantry. Apart from, of course, a large number of staff and operational appointments and higher command, particularly in areas that are nowadays in the news. Before we go on to discussing the book, I will just take a couple of minutes more. I'm acutely aware that I do not want to fall prey to the chairperson's malaise or malady, where people who are chairing a session tend to fall in love with the sound of their own voice, and then they kind of drone on and on. And we're all here to listen to the general and not to me. But I would just like to say a few words about the subject of the book and not about its contents. And the subject, of course, as the name implies, is the Indian Army. And the Indian Army, in my view, is one of the finest institutions that is of the state, of the Indian Republic. It served the nation in times of war and in times of peace. It's an exemplary army. It's multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and how this country manages an army like this is actually held up as an example around the world. And it is of course one of the, I think maybe perhaps the second or the third largest army in the world, but it's not really the numbers that matter, but it's the fact that it's a very, very professional force. And there's no two ways about that. The army is capable of delivering the goods each and every time if it is backed up by the state with the proper equipment, the proper organization. It's an exceptional force. Now, and I think the important thing to remember over here is that it's each and every Indian soldier, or anyone who's ever worn the uniform, he carries the burden of an enormous legacy on his shoulders. And this is not simply a legacy of valor. although the valor and devotion to duty of the Indian soldier are both unquestioned and I feel they are unparalleled, it's something that goes far deeper than that. Because it's rooted in that ephemeral quality which is called an ethos. And it's this ethos that sets the Indian soldier apart from others of his ilk. And this, the source of that ethos is rooted in the very core of our civilizational belief, that of Nishkam Dharma, or selfless service, which was embodied in the message delivered by Lord Krishna to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And it's the basis of this moral principles of the Indian soldier and this message and its variants that have guided him for millennia that really form the core strength and the core values and our core beliefs. I'm laying far greater stress on the moral quality than on the material, which is embodied in courage. Because many armies are courageous. I mean, we don't have a monopoly on courage. But without a moral compass, a brave man or a brave soldier will lack both direction and conviction. And this moral quality, I think, is basically what has set us apart. So in the book, which, as Preeti points out, has been divided by the journal into 6 sections. Sorry, I'll just take a step back. So as I said, it's not a narrative account, but it is a collection of the general's writings over the past, mainly over the past 3 years, but I noticed there are a couple of them that go back to 2016, which have been published in various other accounts as opinion pieces or as articles. And as I said, they raise some very, very pertinent questions. The sections that have been divided into are human rights, reforms, leadership, reminiscences, conflict, and unforgettable heroes. So what I would suggest is that, so that all of you get a flavor of what the book is all about, we will try and cover perhaps each one of these subjects briefly, talking about some aspect of each of them. So before we actually launch into that, my first question to the General would be, sir, if you could perhaps just share with us what got you started on writing in the very first place.
I think all soldiers who spent a long innings in the armed forces have a story to tell. And it's a very interesting story to tell because we see human endeavor at work in very trying circumstances. A soldier is licensed to kill by the state, to further the national interests externally as well as internally. And yet he's a human being who is an ordinary person. He's got a family, he's got his own desires, likes and dislikes, and also his own weaknesses and his strengths. So it's a human endeavor, and often said that war is you did the debate, war is a science or an art. Actually, it's a judicious mix of both, whereas the machine, the weapons that we use are science, and the men who use it are art. It's human endeavor. So having watched all this, and particularly for me, since the time I was, a child of 6 years old, this time your memory starts building up. So I felt that I had a story to tell, but there's initial hesitation that as you used to cryptic writing in the army and either giving orders or presenting options to your superiors for them to issue orders and giving commands. So I was wondering whether how I will adjust and adapt to writing for the public. Then, of course, I first took on to social media, and my tweets became popular on security matters because I decided that I must educate the public and all the people on social media about matters military, what's at all, so that reforms can take place. So then, of course, out of the blue, Shekhar Gupta, who was then editor of the Indian Express, requested me to write for him. So I wrote a couple of articles for them. And then a young Twitter friend, daughter of John Dayal, Karuna John. So she was working for News Laundry. So she just said, why don't you write? I said, but who give me an opportunity? I mean, I was taking that Shekhar Gupta asked me to write as, those articles as one-off. But anyway, she introduced me to News Laundry team, Madhu Trehan and to Abhinandan Sethi. And then began an innings where I wrote close to about 80, 90 articles for them over 2.5 years. They gave me freedom. And then Madhu also told me to humanize the army. He says, she told me that don't make it too military and make it simple and listening for them. I did that. And it was very interesting. I wrote some very fine pieces for them from the core of my heart that covered the vast spectrum about the military life. Having written for them, then I also started writing for Times of India. Then nowadays I write exclusively for the print. And of course, I've written for a number of other portals and magazines on military matters. So it's been a great run. And I would say that I have been able to convey to the public at large in simple language. In fact, this was the lesson that I learned when I started writing for the portals, that it's 800 to 1,000 words, though mine sometimes went longer, that you have to convey it in this much of time. And so you have to simplify the whole thing, do it with military jargon, and make sure that everybody understands what you are saying. So I would say that it's been an excellent sort of happening for myself. And I'm glad that the public, the people who read whatever I wrote have also received it rather well.
So in your book, one of the, in the first section, the section on reforms, so actually the first three, because when we talk about human rights, reforms and leadership, there's a kind of a, they all mesh into each other. And particularly in the section in reforms, one of the sense that one gets is that you say that what you're trying to convey, that there is an institutional ideal at one end, because the armed forces aspire to a very, very high level of moral integrity and so on and so forth, discipline. And then there's a practical reality on the other. And the gap between the two is brought about by human failings or shortcomings. And you suggest in your writings that we should attempt to narrow this gap, that is the gap between the institutional ideal and the shortcomings or the failings or the practical reality, let's put it like that. How do you propose we do that? So what in your view are some of the reforms that are necessary? And you touch upon this in a fairly broad spectrum, because there are a lot of areas that you have touched upon in the book. But if you were to encapsulate that in a 5-minute chunk, how would you do that?
Well, when an officer or a soldier joins the army, he is just his EQ is fairly developed. After all, you are joining as a result, of course, as when you go to the NDA, you're joining very young. So there is still, you can be molded while you are there. Even soldiers, they join between 17 and 21, so they can be molded. But nonetheless, there is an EQ formed, and it's what they see in the society, and they are like anybody else when they land up in the army. Now, the army has got ideals, a value system. So we try to, during the training phase, we try to mold them to strive for those ideals. And this gap between individual, plus the failings, or I would say, or build upon their strengths, and the gap between the failings and the ideals has to be is to be narrowed. So this all depends upon the kind of leadership training that we give to them at our academies. There was a thought process that prevailed, right till I would say middle of last century, that it is discipline that matters the most, and you just have to break the individual will that is there in every human being, or whatever he wants to do as an individual, and make him conform to the higher goals that the army, the military seeks from him. So as a result of this, there was this thing to sort of crush individual spirit. It happened by default. The individual spirit got crushed. Discipline brought about uniformity, and actions became mechanical. And the casualty in such cases is, of course, that one is when you are supervised, everything is hunky-dory. And when you're not supervised, your own failings start coming up. And the second thing that happens is that initiative, which is that is generation of actions from within, is curbed because of discipline and rigidity where we try to do this. Of course, there are rules and regulations which can further narrow the gap in due course that people can be made to conform. So it is the military has to sort of find the best this thing out of this opposites that are there, that clash in the training phase, and also in the subsequent. We are always under training. And so I would say that there's a requirement to develop what you say creativity, which is lacking in the armed forces as a whole. We first subdue them, make them conform, and then all our life we are looking for creative soldiers. In fact, I've written a very nice piece in this on the leadership called "The Message to Garcia," which is a very famous essay, the world's most famous essay, the most well-read essay. So also then other things that come, that since morality and ethics in army play a big role, yet human desire is, we all tend to seek rewards, and we tend to use fair and unfair means to get rewards by human nature. Survival of the fittest, or desire to get the best. So this, unless this is curbed in the very beginning, and the moral standards, this thing is very high, and rules and regulations are there to enforce it. Otherwise, what tends to happen is that so long as the controls are there, these morals and ethics, which are so important for the leaders, because they have to lead men to their death. So it gets disturbed, and that's why you find that excellent junior officers under supervision, or junior soldiers, as they rise in service, the tendency of violating the ethics and norms is much more in the hierarchy, though it's the same lot that is coming from there. So this, so when I wrote about the National Defense Academy and everything, this was at the back of my mind, that our base has to be very strong. We cannot apply the methods of the last century to the leadership of 21st century. I gave an example that we used to put the people in Murga position in my school when I studied in my village next door. And today it is unthinkable that anyone would like his child to put to Murga position. If that be so, then why should soldiers continue to be rigidly trained as they were trained 100 years ago? So this is the broad thing. And I think that so long as we ensure that there is no dilution of character, and if there is any dilution, we crack down upon it by applying the rules and regulations, the military law, then we can still remain a first-rate army. We are a first-rate army. I'm not saying that. All what we are talking is relative. I think as compared to a lot of other armies, the moral standards of and discipline, etc., of our army is very high. We have seen what the various reports of other armies, the abuses that they carry out while they are taking part in insurgencies. Of course, they are mostly away from home, but our soldiers are generally very good in these matters. But issue is still relative. One would like them to be the best. I mean, why be second best? Why not the best in the world?
That's a very valid point, sir. But, so the way I see it is that discipline, of course, if you remember at the training stage, all the academies are always on your daily orders of the. There was always that one line which said, drill is the bedrock of discipline. And discipline, of course, is absolutely essential. But I think the key point over here is, how do you ensure that a value system is embedded and is passed on? I think one of the couple of the pieces that I really liked, you bring out those the flavor of the times when you were a young boy or a young man in various, whether it was in your village, whether it was in the various cantonments, and how when you visited the same places as as a senior officer, there was a world of a difference. Now, change, of course, is a part of life. We cannot stop that. One of the first pieces that I ever wrote was actually, interestingly enough, in the Infantry Journal way back. And at that point, one of the things in that which I had said is, I said that an army is at best a reflection of the state that it serves. The soldiers or the officers, people that constitute an army, are going to reflect the moral values of the time. There are, at the same time, certain institutional ethics. There's an ethos. There are traditions. How do we make sure that we are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So I think the challenge over here is to ensure that that these are enshrined and are not diluted. And ultimately, I think there is a great requirement of impressing these core values or beliefs on the officer core, because it's the officers at the end of the day that will set the pace. And we keep saying that the regimental system is essentially at the center of our army ethos and our values. And there's even a kind of a popular joke saying that the army is not a service. It's a loose confederation of warring tribes, because each officer owes allegiance to his own cap badge, and they don't really look upon the army as a service in its entirety. You make some very valid and pertinent points about training at the military academies. You were DGMT at one point in time. How do you see that perhaps how can this change be brought about? It's all very well to say this should be done, but can it be done?
Actually, I see no problem as to why it cannot be done. The biggest resistance to this comes from the faculty at the academy, because we have a commandant, and unfortunately, not all commandants are selected. They are just appointed. What I'm trying to say is that it's a vacancy that is rotates, say, in the NDA between Army, Navy, and the Air Force, and the first available vacancy that has been appointed first. Whereas, in my view, the best general, lieutenant general, or equivalent from the Navy and the Air Force that is available, who is a stellar example. The issue is relative. All are not the same. All generals are not the same. Neither are all prime ministers nor are all presidents. We should select the best to go there as a commandant. That's the first step. Then the faculty that comes there, they are very young. And a lot of them have not, the selection is not deep. They are sent there based on their record of service. And they need to go through a system of selection like we have in the original selection board, to decide their suitability, that are they going to be good role models for the cadets. So what happens is that the younger instructors, they try to relive their life in the academy. Some of them were in the academy time were also RANs, and so they were at the receiving end of the stick. Some had done well, but generally there's a feeling that this is what is. So when I was member of a committee that we went to reform the National Defense Academy, I have talked about it in the book also, that the biggest resistance came from there. Then the resistance came from, and I had to give this Murga wala example, that this is how I was in my school. I went down, despite my uniform, into the Murga position. And I said that, look, this is, would you allow your son to be like this? Then why are we, just because it happened to you 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, why do you want to repeat the same thing now? So this then of course had a telling impact on this thing. So the faculty has to be very specially selected, and especially the commandant. A few years back, the commandant of NDA was court-martialed for removed from command of the NDA for moral turpitude. Now, what impact would it have left on the generation of cadets who had served there when he was the commandant? This happened just about 5-6 years ago about some recruitment scandal that took place. And this thing came to my mind. In West Point, there was a major scandal in the 70s when a large number of cadets were thrown out, and points were raised in the Senate, and a lot of public outcry as to what is this commandant up to. So the commandant, when the superintendent of West Point, when he was asked about this, he said that West Point is a drop of ink in the ocean of corruption and lack of morals that America has become. He says, if you want this drop of ink to disappear, well, by all means, we'll reinstate them. Otherwise, let my orders stay. The orders stayed. So this is first part. Then, of course, you have to adopt a modern approach to how to develop your leadership. You have to intellectually arm them. You have to, if you want to toughen them, it's not through bullying and hazing. It must be done through proper physical fitness. Does the Olympic champion of marathon or any other game or a boxer, is he beaten into submission to become a boxer? No. He builds his stamina, he practices, he's given motivation. That's how he builds his stamina. So that's the approach to leadership. And to my horror, once when we went there, we found that, can you please show us the leadership program? What is it? How is it written on paper? What are the goals that you have defined for yourself? After all, the Chief of Staff Committee has said that they have given a very strict directive to the Commandant NDA. Your task is to produce leaders for the Indian Armed Forces. And in so doing, you'll make sure that they graduate with a BA or BSc degree. That's all. So when we asked where are the goals, where are the terminal objectives, what are the subsidiary objectives, and so on and so forth, there was a lack of disorder there. Anyway, we put it all down, and to great extent it was implemented. But I think there are miles to go. Even every year, something or the other surfaces up about the same culture prevailing in the barracks. Yeah. Then, of course, the curriculum that we have there, it is ancient. What is the use of a standard graduation for a cadet today? I mean, he is already +2. He is 18 years old, 17, 18 years old. Why not give him a broader this thing? In 3 years, and everybody else becomes an engineer. People finish their MBA. Why not put him through a more intellectual curriculum on military history, on weapon sciences, on aeronautical science, on naval technology, and what have you? So this West Point is known as the best university of the country. And I think NDA is the worst university of the country in terms of academics. So this again, because why should you keep learning the same thing? Why should you learn theory of war once you become a general? Why not at the military academy itself? So I would say like this, there's a major reforms required, which have not been carried out. The big resistance to this, to introduce the higher degree courses there. They said we'll get more focused on to academics. No, they both have to go hand in hand. After first 6 months, no organized PT is carried out at the West Point because they self-actualize the cadets and they do it themselves. So this is what I suggested, that this is how we should do it. And it shouldn't stop at the NDA. Then it must continue thereafter. And any deviation from the character qualities that an officer corps requires must be severely come down upon by the rules and regulations and authority. Role model. Unless a leader is a role model, he can never lead. Everybody looks up to him. I used to always say that whether it's the 30 men, 30 eyes are watching you. When you become a commanding officer, now there are 800 bodies. So there are 1,600 eyes watching you all the time, or 800 pairs of eyes watching you all the time. What are you doing? How do you, how are you treating your own wife? What are you doing? How do you behave in public? Are you physically fit yourself? You want them to physically fit. So the officer or leader at any level has to be a role model, period. This is what the theme of all my writing is all about.
Very pertinent point, sir. We'll move on to now another issue which I think is relatively more on everybody's mind. It relates to recent events. In one of your articles, you wrote, this was in the wake of the 2019 Mamallapuram summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. You'd concluded, you said that the days of China asserting its hegemony by triggering embarrassing border incidents is now over. And you based this assessment on the assumption that from a strategic point of view, China had secured all the Indian territory that it needed before 1962. And you say that after the war, it vacated most of these areas with the exception of a few strategically important areas in Ladakh as per their own claims. And then you also go on to say that all their actions along the LAC and the confrontations that they have engineered since then have been more about them asserting their hegemony by embarrassing India and there are not any real attempts at gaining territory by salami slicing. So we say that in effect, there is no salami slicing being attempted by China. This was what you'd written in 2019. Now, would you like to review these assumptions in view of the recent events in Ladakh?
No, not really. I don't think.
I just added on to this because we'll be running short of time. So one was the review of the assumptions. The other is war or the use of force as an instrument of policy. You yourself have brought up, must always be in pursuit of a political aim. And in the recent Galwan crisis, what do you think was China's aim? So these two things, if you could just address them.
Okay, I will not really review. I do not think China's aim is to secure more territory. The broader aim, which you rightly mentioned yourself, is to assert its hegemony over India. And it wants India to be a junior partner, not an equal competitor. This is how the conflict, or the competitive conflict among nations continues. Like today, it is between America and China as well. Earlier, it was between America and USSR, and so on. So it continues. So this is one part where they want to, and of course, the way we impinge on their foreign policy goals or their strategic national interests in the international arena and in the regional arena and the economic world. So China wants that overall. More pertinent is that China, while we consider that Aksai chain belongs to us and all the territories used for their are territories, China is extremely serious about this issue. They consider these territories are theirs. And any threat of any kind, howsoever remote it may be, is perceived as a major issue, as a strategic issue by them. So what has happened is, it's not that they want, in fact, when they laid out the 1959 claim line, with 7th November 1959, it was, though only points were given out in that letter and subsequent discussions also, they gave out the various longitudes and latitudes. But actually, this line was tactical in nature. And it generally conforms to the areas which they are now seeking at this juncture. Though by the 93 agreement, they had settled down to the LAC as it was. Now, what riled them was that the present government in the last 6 years has given phenomenal impetus to developing infrastructure, which hitherto under strategic restraint, certain sensitive roads and all we used to avoid. Now the go-ahead was given and we have developed infrastructure at a better pace, though of course it is still short of ideal. And we'll start from the north. So we've taken the road to DBO. Unfortunately, we could not get the other road through that comes from the Nubra Valley via Susoma, via Safirla, onto Murgo, and then onto the plains. What was the old Chinese claims of 59, they had made sure that if ever this road is built, their LAC will remain close to that. So this road, as it is, was vulnerable, so it is very vulnerable. And then because it's long, 255 kilometers, and it can be cut off not only at Galwan, but even at Butse, that's the bottleneck of before you enter the Depsang Plains. So it's actually our vulnerability, but it's also Chinese considered as an area from where accession is directly threatened. Ages back, we had captured some papers, rather we got some papers from the intelligence from China, where they visualized that Indian Infantry Division, along with an armored brigade, had launched an offensive into the accession. So China is very sensitive to accession, and this is one area, the DBO area, from where they feel it can take place. That's why the incursions in Depsang Plains, right from 2013 onwards, and even now, so not much is heard about. Galwan River is another axis directly to the western side of accession. And then, very interestingly, this axis, this approach links to the approach from the hot springs. In the hot spring Bogra area, from where we go to Konkala and Lanakla, which is a southern approach to accession, there are two routes. One is the eastern side, which goes to Konkala and Lanakla. Then the northern side, which goes right up to the source of the Galwan River. In 1962, we used this route to get behind the Chinese deployment in the Galwan River. That's why they surrounded our post by getting more troops from the rear. So Galwan, they are very sensitive. One, of course, it cuts off the road early before it can be cut off at Butse. Then from Hot Springs, if we develop an infrastructure, which we have developed, we have taken the roads right up from Hot Springs up to 40 kilometers because the LAC takes a loop. And there are 2-3 routes leading on to the Galwan River upper reaches. Our post in 62 was 80 kilometers upstream. So they were very sensitive to this. And then, of course, Konkala, this area. Now, the area between this Changchenmo River, where Hot Springs and Gogra posts are located, and Konkala, and the Pengong Tso, this area again has been usurped by the Chinese to give greater depth to the southern approaches of accession. That's where the Pengong Tso comes in. Because the Pengong, north of Pengong incursion, that's of 8-10 kilometers. Because from here you can go to Kurnas, you can straight go and cut off the National Highway 219, or even head again towards Konkala. So this area again, so this is the area which China has come and wanted to show. Basically, their short-term strategic or political aim is to prevent India from developing infrastructure that threatens accession and other areas which they have usurped. So this was the political aim of China at the lower end, of the higher aim I mentioned. And the military aim, of course, very clear, that since the 59 line was tactical, this is take the line forward to 1959 claim line and make sure that militarily India cannot do this, pose a threat to DBO, and so that and a sort of possible collusion with Pakistan and so on and so forth, and then bring the line along, running along new LAC along the Shok River, then across Changchenmo, and then onto the north bank of Pengong. So with this was the military kind of objectives that they set for themselves. They surprised us. They have got the areas, got into the areas. Now, a lot of people have asked this question: why have we allowed them to get in? The reason is that the eastern Ladakh is so vast. It is 500 kilometers from Karakoram to Chumar, 489 to be precise. And to hold it, if you want to hold it like the LAC, you will require 3 to 4 divisions. At least 3, ideally, if you hold like the LAC. Now, we have only 1 division there. So what we have done is that and some of the terrain is not that defensible. It's not an impregnable terrain. So our defenses are located well back on higher ground, say like Chishul, Lukung, at the Ladakh range. And from Lukung to Konkala, the distance is 100 kilometers. So these areas were policed by the ITBP, and along with the army, to an extent, army also patrolled there, but there was no physical deployment. So all that the Chinese had to do was to come in and occupy these areas. Not that we did not have plans to occupy, we also had the plans, but because we were surprised, we did not do so. Otherwise, if you can see that they are coming and occupying in strength, not the border guards, but others between finger 4 and finger 8, then we could have also taken the troops from Lukung and Trishul and gone and occupied them. No, we missed this chance because of being surprised. And then, of course, there was dithering. We misread the situation. We thought it's a normal border incursion. And then there was because of political reasons, there was denial, obfuscation. There's still denial. We are still not, nobody knows what's happening, and particularly in the very sensitive area of Dapsang. So this is the current situation. And as I look at it, a possible diplomatic solution is to get the LAC demarcated. That would be India's goal, with buffer zones. There is no way we can go back to status quo and say April. The Chinese are not going to go back just like that. There will be conditions, there will be concessions. Now, what is the concession China gives in this? Well, China gives up 59 claim line, agrees to demarcate the LAC, and these buffer zones remain, and no longer will the border infrastructure or deployment take place in these buffer zones. And this is one possible solution, and I feel that both countries can find a diplomatic solution on these lines and probably are working towards it. They may or may not be able to take it to conclusion, as Mr. Rajnath Singh has said only yesterday, that we do not know how this diplomacy at the end will take place. If this doesn't happen, then I'm afraid when we are engaged in a very long, prolonged kind of a struggle, we will be forced to deploy to defend forward. Instead of 1 division on the ground, we will be actually having 2 divisions plus to man the LAC and all these areas. Will remain in confrontation, and a lot of money will have to be spent to maintain these troops. And if either because of accident or Chinese design or Chinese triggering it or forcing us to respond, so far no shot has been fired. Only clubs and knuckle dusters and what have you has been used. But if it is triggered, then I think the stage is set for a very limited kind of a war, and that may take place. Or I won't say war, I would say a higher degree of conflict may come about. But today we are all right. We may not, because our defenses are on fairly high ground, and technology and the differential that there's between us and China won't affect us too much. So if Chinese initiate, we can definitely give them a bloody nose. We are hesitant to initiate, so we do not want that. We are uncertain about the end result because of the differential, that what may happen in case things go wrong. There may be a setback, which is critically disastrous for anyone that's in power at the center. So it's a very peculiar situation, and I think if we cannot find a diplomatic solution, then this kind of a thing is here for us to stay even throughout the winter, right up to next year.
Thank you, sir. That's a very incisive analysis, and I do hope that a diplomatic solution, as you point out, is forthcoming. and it's of course interesting to know that their possible intent behind all of this is to assert their hegemony, and secondly to secure their what they perceive as their interests in anxiety and their military interests. I'd just like to address the audience now. You know, there are actually, in the section on conflict, there are three areas that have been divided in. One is talks about China, the other is about Pakistan. We haven't had time to go into that because each one of these things can actually, each one of these small 2 or 3 page nuggets, you know, you can develop into each one of them into a session in itself. So there's no way that we can go over each and every aspect that is covered in the book, because it's a very, very wide canvas that's been covered. So China, Pakistan, and the third, of course, is Kashmir. Apart from that, there are numerous other issues that have been dealt with, the aspect of the induction of women into the into the armed forces, the army, the manner in which surgical strikes were carried out. General talks about Balakot, and of course, you know, various aspects dealing with military training, reform. Reform is a theme that recurs time and again in different suggestions. But we'll have to leave all of that for today. And of course, then the last bit, reminiscences and unforgettable heroes. There's some very interesting little snippets, and I'll just mention one of them over here, and maybe if somebody wants to raise it in the Q&A, the general can talk about it. And that was, he describes how at the start of the 71 war, he was witness to the dogfight over Boira, which for those of you who are old enough to remember, is when 3 Nats had engaged 3 sabers of the Pakistan Air Force that were attacking our troops on the ground, of which the General's Battalion was one, Force was one. And they shot down 2 of them. And the third one was hit, but he managed to get back to Dhaka. And the aircraft was shot down by Don Lazarus, Ganapati, and Suarez, all 3 of whom got perhaps the first Veer Chakras of the 71 war. And one of the pilots that ejected, the Pakistani pilots that ejected, was actually captured by the general himself. And he later on, Parvez Mehdi, became the Chief of Air Staff of the Pakistan Air Force subsequently. I'll now, sir, what I do is, you know, because we'll run out of time and then we will incur Preeti's wrath, and we don't want to do that. So we'll,
no problem.
We'll throw the floor open for questions. Preeti, will you be doing that, or should?
I think we could all, whoever sees it, I think Dilip D'Souza had asked me a question right away. So maybe we can ask him to, you know, just ask Arvinderji, if you will unmute, and Dilip D'Souza.
I unmuted myself.
Yeah.
Okay, General Panag, it's a pleasure to listen to you, and I have a lot of respect for you and for your, and I'm looking forward to reading your book, and Rana knows that I have a lot of respect for him. I just want to talk, mention a little bit about, this is my favorite war memoir. I'm sure you've read it. It's called With the Old Breed, by this Marine who fought in the Pacific, Eugene Sledge. And I just wanted to read out one little sentence that he talks about the way the battle was. And then he says, talks about some terrible cruelty on the American part. And he says, such was the incredible cruelty that decent men could commit. I mean, he talks about that, but then he says, I recall some of the eloquent phrases of politicians and newsmen about how gallant it is for men to shed his blood for his country and to give his life's blood for a sacrifice, and so on. The words seemed so ridiculous. Only the flies benefited. So I want to ask you, General Panag, to the soldier who's fighting a battle, what is his fundamental loyalty that he feels? Some soldiers have told me that it is to his fellow soldier next to him, to his paltan, and there is a feeling almost of love there. I mean, the word they've used is love. And this is what sustains his spirit as he fights. How true is this? This is what I wanted to ask you.
I think I have written one of the articles covers this specific aspect as to why soldiers fight. It's not for nationalism, it's not due to patriotism, and I've given that. See, it has all the famous studies that have been done by SLA Marshall and what have you in the German army and everything. It is the unit cohesion, the camaraderie that prevails in a group. And this can be as low as a section and a platoon, a battalion. Generally, it remains restricted up to the battalion level. Beyond that, also you can have formation cohesion, but it's very limited. Normally, it's a section that is more predominant than the platoon, company, and battalion. And we have an edge over everybody else because we follow the regimental system, where our soldiers do not go on postings. We remain in the same unit. They go on postings, but they'll come back to the same unit. So a person spends his life about anything from 25, 30, 32 years in the same unit, same family. And this system is followed in one form or the other in all our arms and services. And where it is not, the cohesion is built, like the Air Force builds the cohesion as a whole service, but it's very small in size. It's the whole service cohesion, same way the Navy, ship cohesion and all. While patriotism forms a backdrop, and the national spirit, everything is a backdrop. We swear by the Constitution, we'll defend it and all that. But soldiers fight for unit cohesion. And no one wants to be let down in front of his comrades. That's why even a dead body is so important to us. We must get it back. And nothing galvanizes soldiers more than their own comrades in trouble. I mean, people have lost their lives just to get back a body which could have well been left there and got back later. So unit cohesion, the camaraderie, the mental spirit, or I would say, start from the lowest subunit. That's why, despite our regimental system is based on caste lines and religion lines, which strengthens it all the more. But it militates against the idea of India. But we have still retained it, and I think for the last 200 years, because the advantages that accrue out of it are far higher than the disadvantages, in terms of the national ethos. That's the way I have felt it, and that's the way I saw it in 71 war. We cannot let down Chhati Sikh, 4 Sikh, our unit, our section.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Kishore Thukral has a question.
Should I read it out? Or it's next to the screen?
If he's there, he can speak. If not, then we can just read it.
I can ask the question. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This is, actually these are 2 small questions for General Panag. I don't know whether the answer is going to be long. But General, I just wanted to know your views on the AFSPA, AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and the various allegations of human rights violation against the army in troubled areas, number 1. And number 2, as a civilian, I feel today that the army, in fact, the entire defense forces are getting politicized. That's my feeling. That's my feeling. I would love to be convinced that I am wrong. So I would like to have your views on these 2 questions, General. Thank you.
Okay, I think very pertinent. Coming to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Firstly, the act itself is a very sketchy act, which was hastily brought up in 1956. And it's from an old British, colonial instrument, which was modified. It's cryptic to a fault, in the sense that it's not explanatory enough. There's far too much of ambiguity in the act itself. It's just a very small thing, just 2-3 pages. That's all. And since the army doesn't have the powers of the police, we don't have the powers to search. We do not enjoy the same kind of immunity that the police enjoys while conducting task. So there was a requirement to give army a degree of immunity when they were operating in aid of the civil authority and in the insurgency. That's why the Army Act came along. It's an empowering instrument. Nowhere does the Act say that it gives absolute immunity. No, it is for lawful actions, for lawful commands, for the law, when you adhere to the law of the land, that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act protects you. It is not supposed to protect you from rogue actions. So it is the application of the Act and its utilization by the armed forces, if at all there are flaws have come up. It is not in the interest of any army to have soldiers violating the law of the land. Once you have an army like that, then the end result is Bangladesh. That's what the Pakistani army did, and Bangladesh was created. Otherwise, they were fellow Muslims, and Muslim bonds are, everybody generally thinks like that, at least I don't, are thicker than blood and what have you, but yet, because of the atrocities committed by the Pakistan army, they lost Bangladesh. Rest was, of course, we executed, the death blow was given by the Indian army, and of course in conjunction with the Mufti Bhai. So I have never ever received an order, a blanket order from anybody to do anything wrong in the army, and I have never given a wrong order myself. So this argument that this is what kind of is the kind of practice prevailing is wrong. It's not correct. Yes. How does it happen? It happens that at the lower level, there are rogue actions. And then because the army is supposed to be perfect, nothing is supposed to be wrong, so we tend to cover it. While it's just a rogue action, a story is made up, and then because of that, we have to use the Armed Forces Special Powers Act to protect that matter. Because the story is made up by the unit, at the lower level. Now, it's the duty of the higher commanders to make sure that this doesn't happen. But at times, even they become part of the same thing. Because you start seeing in the insurgencies, your own people who are misguided, whom you are dealing with because at the moment their ideology or whatever is going against the state, you treat them as enemies. Technically, yes, you can, because anybody who picks up arms against the state is an enemy, but they are not in that sense. It's not us versus they. So this happens at that end. And a classic example, which I've covered in detail in my book, is the Major Gugai case. Now, whatever people may say, this entire story about him trying to save election people and all is all a concocted story made to cover his actions. It was just a foolish action by a young officer who out of the blue thought that I must sort this whole matter out and parade this guy so we'll stop the stone pelting for good. He did it. Once he did it, the story got concocted, and the entire hierarchy of the army stood by him. Not only that, the entire nation stood by him. Because by this time, nationalism had come to the fore, and we were seeing every stone pelter as an enemy, as a part of the insurgents and part of the terrorists. And as a result, we earned infamy. The stellar record that we had in conducting model insurgency campaigns was brought down to zero. And I was, to the chagrin of my colleagues and also my former comrades in the service, and I was singled out for abuse, ridicule, for having stood by this. But I'm very clear, and even today, and I said that time, even from the last man standing, I'll adhere to this. An army simply cannot reduce itself to the level of terrorism. You do that, then today it is in insurgency, tomorrow you'll do the same thing in military operations. And you will be so morally corrupted that you'll come to grief. I think that's how I leave it there. Coming to the politicization, there has been a trend. Politicization in real terms is when a army identifies with the ideology of the party. A really politicized army is, for example, the People's Liberation Army of China, which is where the commissars or political representative is a part of the army structures. then the members of the army are part of the National Military Commission, which governs the employment of force in China. So they are a politicized army. Pakistan army is a politicized army because it identifies with a particular ideology of the, well, that's the ideology of the state also, but it gets involved, it's a stakeholder in everything that happens in the country. Indian Army, what has happened is that parties, political parties, which are on the right of center or extreme right, their nationalism for them is big deal. And so when you, in nationalism, military prowess is a major issue. The people who defend the nation, and these are the guardians of the nation. So what has happened is that as a result of the political ideology, attempt has I won't say it's a deliberate attempt. It's an inadvertent attempt that army has been made a part and parcel of every facet of national life. It's getting involved with everything, and soldiers. The distinction. Army is an organ of the state, and we have blurred the line between the government and the army. So you could if you criticize the government for its national security policy, they say, how dare you criticize the army? And army in any case has been deified, which itself is wrong because it fails to reform itself. What I would like to say is that that Indian Army is not politicized in that sense. We are being exploited politically. Sorry, I just this thing. What I would say that Indian Army is not politicized as such, and it is being exploited by the political class for its own ideological reasons. By and large, the army remains apolitical. Now the hierarchy, because the hierarchy, for reasons which we discussed earlier in the session, that because of its character values and ethical values and moral compasses, having been lost to some extent. So what has happened is that their higher promotions are approved by the government. Major generals and above are approved by the government. So as a result, and the very high promotions, there's discretionary powers with the government to promote or not to promote. For example, whom to make the chief, and not necessarily the next in seniority. It can be merit and selection, which are at best of times nebulous. So the hierarchy there's a tendency to started bending towards with the wind. And also the post-retirement beneficial appointments that people seek in terms as ambassadors, as governors and all, is another lollipop that politicians do hang in front of them. It's not that they want the generals to be like that. It's just generals themselves are seeking advantages for themselves, and it's personal. And this affects the advice the hierarchy gives to the government. Rather than give impartial advice, professional advice, the advice gets colored. I mean, you take the example that for the last 6 years, we have been hearing the present chief of defense staff, he was the chief of army staff earlier, and everywhere the trumpet of 2.5 front war was being blown. To China, Pakistan together, and we will half front was insurgency and what's going on internally in India. Now this, and when we are faced with a situation of not even, I would say it's not even a full front, because it is only happening in a small portion of eastern Ladakh. We are scurrying all over the world to buy equipment, and money is being sanctioned to buy equipment post haste. What was the advice? What were the military hierarchy telling the government about their own state? That they are ready for a 2.5 front war. They are not ready for even border skirmishes. So this is what happens when a hierarchy, which is not up to its leadership qualities, which is lacking in character, and which starts bending with the wind, because the government is indirectly encouraging such things in terms of identifying the army with everything else. But overall, the saving grace is that army is apolitical, and it will remain so unless, of course, further inroads are made, which hopefully I don't think it will happen in our country. The public is very alive to the problem. That's why I come back to a theme in my entire book is we must address the officer cause corrective qualities. There's dilution, and this is the most dangerous thing for our armed forces in the years to come.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Your answers are very reassuring.
I think there's a string of questions about China and what happened over there, right from the scuffle to do the soldiers not have enough proper equipment to did the Prime Minister lie when he said that China did not occupy territory and so on. I think Sanjeev Batra is raising his hand. He had a question on China, so maybe we can have him ask. And close after the next two questions, Arvinderji. Sanjeev Batra.
Yeah. Thank you. General Saab, I've been interacting with you on Twitter extensively, and I have the highest respect and regard for your capabilities and integrity. I just have two very quick questions to ask you. One is this post of the CDS. I don't think it's been properly defined by the government as to what exactly its role is. It seems to be looming large over the army chief's role, and Mr. Naravne, the General Naravne, seems to have gone into the background, and the presence of General Rawat seems to be overpowering. So I don't know whether there have been a specific, a proper definition of that role, or has he just been created as a political appointee to control the Army, Navy, and Air Force? I'm putting it very bluntly. And my second question is about Modi. How accurate Prime Minister Modi was when he said China hasn't occupied a territory if status quo ante hasn't been maintained? So just these two quick questions, sir. Okay.
Now, first of all, I think coming to the CDS, that question is actually linked to the overall our approach to carry out military reforms. To carry out military reforms, you have to first carry out a strategic review, and what are the kind of threats the country faces, what are the kind of wars which are going to take place in 2020, and then what kind of force structures you require, and then what kind of funding you require. If there's an existing army, how it has to be reorganized, restructured, and how are we to fund it. And the driver for all this is the national security strategy. The problem with us is we don't have a national security strategy. The Defense Planning Committee under the NSA since 2018, it used to be under the defense minister earlier, has been tasked to work out a national security strategy since 2018. And 2 years have gone past, and we are yet to see the national security strategy anywhere. All countries of the world, all major powers have their national security strategy in public domain, or at least the overt part of it. So when the start point is wrong, so you created an existing structure which we inherited from the Second World War. We have tinkered around with it a little here and there. We have not carried out major upheavals. China has gone to combined arms brigades directly under the Corps. We are still operating in command corps and divisions. I mean, with divisions and everything. America has gone to the brigade combat teams. We are still operating, as I said, in divisions. So we are tinkering around with an existing structure, and there is a requirement of combined tri-services approach, and that is why the CDS has been appointed. Now, then there are two conflicting options. One is the American way. In America, the chief of combined chiefs of staff, or the chief of the chairman combined chiefs of staff, who is the equivalent of our CDS, he doesn't have an operational role. The operational role is with the field commanders, like what our commands are, not even with the chiefs. The chiefs are administrative heads in America, and the field commands are answerable directly to the president. However, the orders to them are conveyed through the chairman joint chiefs of staff. That's one approach. The other approach is to continue having the three chiefs, and as we have decided, and then the the CDS has no operational role. He is supposed to, put the things together, and then the execution is done by the chief himself. So we'll have to eventually go into the theater command type of thing, and chiefs will themselves get the thing due course. But at present, what the government has said is the CDS has no operational role. Well, I think it's a matter of personalities. I know them all. I mean, General Vipin Rawat was my student, and I also know in the military academy. I know General Naravane also very well. I think they're thorough professionals. It's not really that, but personalities do play a part. And since he's been the former chief and he stepped up to the CDS, that's why in some armies it's prudent that you should not do this. You should actually pick up somebody from down below, even if he's junior. Well, that's when the real merit prevails. They do that in America. Not necessarily the chiefs are promoted or the senior most are promoted to become the chairman, joint chiefs of staff. So to that extent, I think these are teething problems. Unfortunately, we have this right in front of us, this whole problem. But I think the Chief of Army Staff should be in charge, and he is in charge probably. And because the CDS has to give a composite advice, since the Air Force is also involved, so he is also seen right up front. So this is when I looked at the way we have gone about our reforms and how the CDS has, the present role. I think the chief is in charge. I don't think General Rawat is in charge. Now, there was a second part of the question you asked. Hello.
Yeah.
About Prime Minister lying.
Yeah,
Yes.
whether he made an accurate statement.
Yeah, actually, though it was clarified by the thing next day that he only meant in respect of Galwan. But I think there has been a tendency on part of the government to deny and to obfuscate. Now, despite no formal briefing has been carried out so far, either by the military or by the government. Yes, on Thursday, every Thursday, the Foreign Ministry gives out a kind of a weekly review, but it has not clarified any matters. A few tidbits are thrown here and there by the Foreign Minister and by the Defense Minister. They give you mixed signals. The fact on the ground is, I think there can be no further discussion on the subject in terms of what it is that in the fingers area, China has taken from finger 8 to finger 4. Now, our perception that LAC was at finger 8, yes, this area was differing perceptions, but are we to worry about China's perception as to finger 4, or have we to worry about our perception that our LAC is at finger 8? So certainly he has definitely come in. 40 square kilometers goes here. In Hot Springs, this Chinese have still not gone across the line of actual control, and sources, as I said, diplomatic and military sources. This is what everybody's quoting. Identical stories. Every day these tidbits are given out by the same listing. So this is, so they only are giving this information. They have not gone back to their own side. That's what people say. It's going to be a long haul. It may go to the winters. See, they are creating the possibility just in case things don't sort themselves out. Then in Galwan, yes, barring the bit of this thing about where patrol point 14 is, whether it is right at the LAC or it was the other side of the LAC. I think in Galwan, they have gone back to their side. In Gogra, they have gone back to their side because that was the pullback. 2.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers, they have gone back to their side. In Hot Springs, certainly they have not. That's another approach that goes to the source of the Galwan River. In Depthong, I mean, this is not talked about at all. But yet the sources are saying that the intrusion is 15 to 18 kilometers deep. So I think the government has made a definite attempt to deny and obfuscate. And the clarifications given by the government have not been adequate. And we have played into China's hands. Correct. This is their narrative that you are attacking us. We are. This is our area. You are the aggressors here. And what impression are we creating on the rest of the world?
Absolutely.
We may fool ourselves, but the world is not fooled. I mean, that Balakot was a stalemate. and not a clear-cut, decisive action by a victory for us, or a relative victory, if you can call it, in 2 days. But the whole world knows it. So is this the impression? Is it all that we just fool our public, because since nobody knows about the area? Even this time, barring a few good men and who have done this, the entire media, everybody has been part of this facade as to what the truth about what's happening at the line of action control.
Perfect. Thank you.
Preetiji, there's another question from Mr. Gaurav Datta. Would like him to be on.
I think that should be the last one. And then if Rana, you would please do the concluding remarks to tie up the conversation. Maybe this last question and then.
Yeah, Gaurav, you can you can ask your question. Gaurav,
I can hear you.
Yeah, please ask your question. Go ahead.
I think somebody will have to read out. I can't hear the question.
No, I think probably he is here to ask. I have sent you the question, Preetiji. You can ask the question on his behalf.
Okay. Given your assertion on China's sensitivity to Aksai Chin region, how would you assess our close partnership with the US factored in by the Chinese? Would it be right to say that the threat is more continental than maritime?
See, in today's world, unless the national interest of a particular country so demands, nobody goes to war for anybody else's sake. And that era of Warsaw Pact being assisted by America, or rather NATO against the Warsaw Pact, those days are over. So if we think that United States is going to come and do a direct assistance in terms of, let's say we have the United States Air Force coming in or taking on PLA, I think neither we would like it. Because Prime Minister Nehru is still berated for having sent that letter to President Kennedy asking for 6 divisions and what have you, and whatever help he asked for the US Air Force and so on and so forth. That happened immediately before the Chinese withdrew in 1962. So I don't think neither we want, neither America. So there's going to be no direct action by them. Yes. Internationally, in terms of pressure and all, they would definitely be on our side and exert pressure on China. But China has shown complete disregard. I mean, the laws of seas, to which they have been for last 50, 60 years, there have been many meetings, laws of seas, conference, this and that, and the economic zones and territorial waters. And by drawing the 9-dash line in South China Sea, they've just taken a whole sea. So China has shown utter disregard for any kind of international norms. And to talk in terms of contesting China in this thing, what has America done so far in the Pacific, in the South China Sea, to prevent China from intimidating Vietnam or Philippines or Indonesia 1,500 kilometers away, the island that they are claiming? So I do not think that it is practical, because China has armed itself and nobody is going to go to war for this. But yes, we will get support from them, and they are not going to give us weapons for free. That era is again over. That's the time when everything used to come free. Like in case of with Pakistan, it's quid pro quo. You were helping us in Afghanistan, so we'll give you military aid to fight terrorism. So of course, that was diverted towards its own army. But overall, they're not going to give it to you for free. You want to pay, you can pay and take buy the arms from them. And there also, they have been very finicky about the kind of technology they want to give to us. I mean, they are trying to sell us the F-16. Why can't they sell us the latest aircraft if we are their allies? Why can't they give us the Predator? Why are they so hesitant? Why are they so shy of giving us the Predator drone, the armed drone? And they don't want to give us the technology. They want to pay, and we pay for everything that we buy from them. So this is how the world is working today. This is how the modern alliances are. But yes, in the international overall arena, America will.
Rana, Chhina ne red pag bandi ready.
They will give us adequate support, diplomatic.
Thank you, sir, for the answer. Preeti, may we then propose a vote of thanks?
Ji, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure all of you will agree we've had a very, very interesting discussion. As I pointed out earlier, there are a lot of areas that have been touched upon in the book, which are very, very interesting and are very pertinent. You may agree with the general or you may disagree with the general, but one thing you cannot do is you cannot ignore the general. So, which I think is a very good thing, because the more debate and discussion you have, the more we are able to shine a light on areas that need either reform or redressal. We will find that our institutions will come out stronger, our army will come out stronger, our nation will emerge stronger. So I think it's very important that books like this are written and discussions like this are had in the public domain. That is essentially the bedrock of a democracy. It is the strength of a nation's institutions which ultimately translates into its national greatness, its national power. So thank you very much, sir. And to all our listeners and others, get a copy of the book and read it. You will come out wiser, and it'll give you something to think about. I can assure you about that. Thank you.
Well, it was a privilege to be associate and be to talk to an enlightened audience like at the Majha House, and I really enjoyed it. And in fact, I think I look forward to more interaction with such enlightened fellow intellectuals, and it will be a privilege to be with you all again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rana, for that wonderful conversation. Thank you, General Panag. And I hope we will get you there physically at Majha House in the near future once we are done with the lockdown and everything. And I'm really happy because a lot of the stuff that the Aam Aadmi or the Aam Aurat actually thinks has actually been said by you. And I'm thankful to you for that. So thank you very much for a wonderful conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chhina sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chhina.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.